Following some breaking news out of the Middle East, Israel's defense minister telling the IDF to be on the highest level of alert after Hamas announced it will delay the next scheduled release of hostages.
Yeah, they were supposed to be freed next Saturday, but Hamas is now accusing Israel of breaking their ceasefire terms. CNN's Jeremy Diamond is in Tel Aviv. Jeremy, walk us through this, what Hamas is alleging and how Israel's responding here.
Well, Hamas is accusing Israel of committing several violations of the ceasefire agreement. They point to things that have happened in the past, like the delay of the return of Palestinians to the northern part of the Gaza Strip, which Israel at the time said was because Hamas didn't release a hostage that it was supposed to at the time when it should have. And they also point to things that are still ongoing, including, they say, that Israel is obstructing the entry of shelter equipment, such as tents, but also critically these prefabricated homes that have not yet entered the Gaza Strip, according to Hamas. We've yet to get a response from the Israeli government to that specific allegation, but what we do know is that the Israeli government is reacting to this threat to delay the release of the hostages scheduled for this coming Saturday as a result, with the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz saying that he has told the Israeli military to be on its, quote, highest alert for any possible scenario in the Gaza Strip. He also says that Hamas's statement amounts to a very serious violation of the ceasefire. Now, importantly, we actually just got a follow-up statement from Hamas. The initial statement came from Abu Ubaida, the spokesman for Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades, the military wing of Hamas. And this statement is coming from Hamas, the political movement, saying in a statement that they are issuing this statement 5 days ahead of time in order to give the mediators, quote, sufficient time to pressure Israel to fulfill its obligations, making clear, as they say here, that this, quote, leaves the door open for the exchange to proceed as planned. So perhaps not a walk back, but making clear that this is a threat that Hamas is making here that could be averted should the mediators and should Israel take action to remedy some of these violations that Hamas is alleging. And so I think it's clear that while this represents perhaps the most serious threat to the ceasefire that we have seen so far, in particular because it comes at such a sensitive time in Israel following the images of those 3 emaciated, newly released hostages on Saturday, it's also quite clear that this is a threat by Hamas and something that could be addressed by the mediators. We know, of course, that in the past, Israel had delayed the return of Palestinians to northern Gaza by several days, but that issue was ultimately remedied in conversations with the mediators and led to an earlier release than planned of that hostage Arbel Yehud, as well as 2 additional Israeli hostages. So this is part of any ceasefire agreement. You're going to see accusations of violations. You're going to see threats. The question is, how will Israel respond to this and whether these alleged violations that Hamas is accusing Israel of can indeed be remedied in time for the hostage release on Saturday to go forward as planned.
Jeremy Diamond, live from Tel Aviv for us. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Joining us now is CNN political and global affairs analyst Barak Ravid. He's also a politics and foreign policy reporter for Axios. Barak, what are you hearing from your sources in Israel about this?
I think the Israeli government at the moment is still trying to figure out whether this Hamas announcements are truly because of tactical issues on the ground about how many makeshift homes were allowed to go into Gaza, how many bulldozers to clear out debris has been allowed into Gaza, or whether it's a much bigger issue that has something to do with phase 2 of this deal. The negotiations on phase 2 are supposed to start last week. They still haven't started. So I think Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Netanyahu and his top aides who are meeting now in Jerusalem, are trying to figure out whether it's a tactical thing or something which is much more strategic.
And complicating that, we see the pictures coming from Tel Aviv. You have families, you have supporters of the families taking to the streets. Barak, what is the domestic pressure on Netanyahu in this, and how is that being perceived by Netanyahu and those close to him?
I think the pressure has been increasing quite dramatically since the hostages started coming out, and especially after last Saturday when the last 3 hostages who were released came out in a very, very bad physical condition. It created a wave of pressure on the government, both in demonstrations on the streets and both by statements by families of hostages who were released and families of hostages who are still in Hamas captivity. And I think the number one issue you hear from hostage families is deep concern that both Netanyahu, or a deep concern that Netanyahu managed to convince President Trump that phase 2 of the deal is not that important and that the resumption of the war is more crucial at the moment.
I just want to let our viewers know, a moment ago we were looking at live pictures of protests in Tel Aviv following this announcement by Hamas. Barak, I want to play some sound for you of President Trump speaking to reporters on Air Force One, and he was talking about Palestinians' right to return to Gaza after it's supposedly redeveloped by the United States. Let's listen.
I think that it's a big mistake to allow people, the Palestinians or the people living in Gaza, to go back yet another time. And we don't want Hamas going back. And think of it as a big real estate site. And the United States is going to own it and will slowly, very slowly, we're going to rush, develop it.
Brock, how do those comments have an impact on the situation right now, and how could they shape the second phase of the ceasefire deal?
So they definitely have an impact, and there are some Israeli officials who are involved in the negotiations that think that this is also a signal by Hamas that it's their way to push back on Trump's recent comments about moving Palestinians out of Gaza, and also a signal by Hamas that if Netanyahu is not going to seriously negotiate on the second phase of the deal, then maybe maybe phase 1 will not be implemented in its entirety, and not all the hostages in phase 1 will be released. And I think that Trump said something very interesting on Air Force One, in addition to what you just showed. He said that there's a dribble of hostages coming out, and that at a certain point, and that he starts to lose his patience. And I think the number one question is whether President Trump is going to say now, listen, I'm not going to have like the situation of every week another 3 hostages. Everyone who is now held by Hamas, I want them out as part of one big deal and not this phased approach. And I think that's the question, whether Trump will go down the road or will continue down the current path.
Barak Ravid, thank you so much.